searching history for buried classics. This is Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Welcome back, everybody, to Lost Treasures of Gaming. We have another great game for you this week. I am one of your hosts, Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion Tane.
And I'm your other host, Sid Bolton, otherwise known as Dirk the Daring, and I'm also your gaming archaeologist on the OMG Hour.
So this week we have a new kinds of lost treasure. I think this is the first time we've done this, Sid. We actually have a lost treasure for an arcade game versus a home console game.
Yeah, I have done some Lost Treasures. I think there's one other one that might be an arcade game originally, but this is certainly, for an interview, this is the first time we've had somebody that, worked on a game that was initially released as an arcade game, and a very unique arcade game at that.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, we're talking about 1990s Smash TV from William Arcade?
Williams Midway, yeah.
Williams Midway, yeah. So Smash TV.
There was a lot of both companies involved there for a while.
Yep. A classic twin-stick shooter. I mean, among the first of the twin-stick shooters.
Yeah, exactly. We think about games today that are on modern consoles using, moving and shooting, independently with those two sticks, but you have to remember that in the arcade that was not typical at all at that time.
Right. I mean, I don't even know what the first one was, but I know that Robotron obviously was a twin-stick shooter because Robotron is what was one of the things to inspire Smash TV. And not only that, but of course, I believe it's well known that it was inspired by Running Man, the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of made sense because that movie, which of course was from a book, or a short story, I should say, kind of made sense that it would make the transition to a video game. But of course, back in those days, there wasn't a lot of licensing going on, and honestly, games that had inspiration from other kinds of media were just often made into games. I mean, we've done, for example, Summer Games has been one of our lost treasures, and if that game was made today, it would likely be a licensed game based on actual Olympic events. Whereas back in the day, people, the programmers and the game designers got their inspiration from real world things or other things they had seen, and they just kind of made their own take on it, and none of that stuff was really licensed back then, for the most part.
Exactly. So this week we had the pleasure of speaking to Mark Turmell, who is the programmer behind Smash TV. He's the one who came up with the idea for it, and it's going to be interesting. We're going to talk to him about what it was like to program for the arcade. I mean, that's not something we've never spoken to somebody who did an arcade game, so let's do that, shall we? This is Mark Turmell, the programmer and developer of Smash TV. Mark, thank you so much for coming on Lost Treasures of Gaming.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. So, of course, we want to talk to you about Smash TV, which is a game that you created back in the day for the arcade. I think this is actually the first time we've ever done an arcade title, and not a home console title. But before we get into that, can you just give us a little bit of your history of how you got into gaming development in the first place?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm kind of like the grandfather of video games. My first game came out in 1980 on the Apple II computer.
And I played that game.
Sneakers?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my very first game ever was Sneakers on the Apple II, and I did a few games there on the Apple II, and then I joined a company called Sirius Software, Sirius like the star. And that was out in California, and I started developing the Atari 2600 games. I did a couple of games there, Turmoil and Fast Eddie, and then joined Activision, where we started developing games for them. And basically, after another several years, ended up headed toward the coin-op business. And my favorite game of all time is Robotron. I was a big fan of Eugene Jarvis, with Defender and Robotron. So when I joined Williams Electronics, I did so with the intent of reviving the dual joystick game mechanic, which was on Robotron in like 1982. And so I set off to make Smash TV there starting in 1989.
So what was, other than Robotron, what was the inspiration behind Smash TV itself? What made you go to that style of game, or that kind of game, really,
well,
other than Robotron, obviously?
Yeah. Well, so I liked the film Running Man. It was an Arnold Schwarzenegger film there back in the the mid '80s.
Great movie.
And great movie. The whole game show theme made sense to me. And I was coming from kind of the Nintendo, NES. I was working for Hasbro. I was working on the I don't know if you've heard of Sewer Shark and Night Trap.
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I was in the mix there on this company called ISIX that was funded by Hasbro to make an interactive kind of movie playing game system. So I was working on a few games there with David Crane from Activision and Rob Fulop. So basically I liked the power that the coin-op hardware allowed me. Coming from, this Hasbro project and NES type games where you couldn't really put too much on the screen, joining Williams Electronics and seeing how powerful their hardware was, the very first thing I got up on the screen was, a grunt just kind of running toward toward my cursor, and my little character that I would control on the joystick. And I just kept turning more and more and more on, just to really exercise and understand the power of the hardware. And that hardware had been developed internally there at Williams Electronics with Eugene Jarvis, and Mark Lafredo was the key hardware guy. And it was just, amazing, the horsepower that was there. They had done a game called Narc right beforehand, and so there was kind of a good engine and a good running start for me. And so I just kept pushing toward, bringing more enemies and grunts onto the screen, and have more and more firepower for the player. And just kept plugging away.
So what this released in 1990, Smash TV. So what years when were you developing this?
Yeah, I joined Williams Electronics in 1989, and it took me 10 months actually to develop the game. I remember that because they had a royalty plan that would, you had to finish your game in 12 months, but if you got your game done in 10 months, you got like 50% more royalties.
Oh,
so
nice.
The 10 months was a great target for a team.
Sure.
I hired a young artist, a comic book artist named John Tobias, who worked with me on Smash TV and Total Carnage right after that. And then he broke off, or we broke off. I did NBA Jam, and he did Mortal Kombat. So he's the co-creator of the Mortal Kombat franchise. And in fact, I still work with him today. I'm the senior creative director at Zynga, and he's an art director, and we do games together out here in California today.
Wow, that's
so
awesome.
It was about 10 months of development. John and I and a few other guys fired up the game, and he did 90% of the art in the game. The Mutoid Man and the grunts and the character and so forth, the backgrounds.
So developing for an arcade machine versus a home console, like what programming language are you using for this?
Well, that was all in assembly language.
It was all done in assembly. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, as when I started, in 1980 or so, when I started making games on the Apple II, I started with the BASIC programming language, thinking, okay, maybe I can make a game in BASIC. I can program this. Of course, it took me a month or so before I realized, okay, that doesn't have the horsepower to really put a lot of visuals on the screen. There were draw commands, and you could put boxes on the screens, things like that, but it was very slow. And I'm a big believer in 60 frames a second. I think every game has to be 60 frames a second to be successful, and at least. And when I got to this coin-op hardware, it was just amazing that the horsepower was there. And so the difference in regular consoles at that time and coin-op was probably about maybe 10x. And of course, over time that dwindled until today, where the experiences would be comparable, or the consumer consoles would be even stronger.
Yeah.
But in that heyday, it was about 10x.
So how different is it developing a game for the arcade versus a home console at the time, other than you mentioned horsepower, but
yeah.
Was there a lot of difference developing a game for the arcade back then?
Well, it's actually very similar. It's kind of amazing that the principles and the practices that I deploy today, making mobile phone games for Zynga, I actually learned or crafted back there in those early days. It's very similar. We did everything in assembly language, from on the Apple II to the NES and the coin-op hardware. Everything was in assembly language until NFL Blitz was the first game developed in C++ there inside Midway, and that was right around the time where the hardware was getting strong enough where you could use a language such as C to still have the horsepower. So now, of course, you don't, nobody has to develop an assembly language today. But back then it was imperative for that first, the first really, 15, 20 years of the industry of video games. You needed to do everything in assembly language.
In order to get the speed, really, right? And
to make anything that felt good.
When you were developing it, like what? Obviously, how did the development cycle go in terms of what kind of because the target platform was this arcade hardware? So, what did you actually write the assembly code on? Did you must have used some other computing platform and then downloaded the final executable into the target hardware? So what kind of a machine did you use to actually put together the assembly?
Sure. Whenever you write in assembly language, you're at the mercy of whatever the CPU, what the processor is inside your hardware. And the coin-op hardware that Williams used in that day was a 34010, a TI CPU, a 34010. And so it has its own instructions, its own maybe peculiar features. But we used a text editor, and then every processor comes with a compiler to compile, your instructions down into machine language. And so we would basically just use the Texas Instruments compiler to have our game execute. And because it was custom hardware, we had, some special tools, just a connection right from your PC right onto the, ribbon cable going into the hardware. And we could do custom, breakpoints, and we could, recover the hardware and reset it if the system detected it was hung or, hanging due to a bug, those kinds of things. But basically, you would develop just on a PC, and the screen would be the actual hardware. So you would, you would dump it right onto the hardware. Every developer making a coin-op game would have his keyboard, hooked up to his PC, but then right next to him would be a control panel and the cabinet. So I would just spin my chair every time I, hit run, and just right there spin over to the coin-op control panel and execute it like that.
Now you mentioned something there about stopping the game if a bug occurs. Did anything like that ever happen after shipping a game? Like and how
Yeah.
how in the days of arcade would you deal with that if there were bugs in a game after shipping it to the arcade?
Yeah, this is a good story. We basically there was a little chip on the hardware. Every monitor gets refreshed 60 fields per second, right? There's a scan gun going up and down on the monitor, and there's a little bit of time after the scan gun gets to the bottom where your code is being executed and it goes back up to the top, and so you kind of have this loop of logic and refreshing the screen. And we had a chip that was part of the hardware that was called a watchdog. And it would look to see if the screen was being refreshed as it should be, 60 fields per second. And if it ceased, if this little chip detected that it ceased to be updating, then it would assume that we had had an infinite loop in our code and it had crashed and it wasn't being able to flow through the normal pattern of painting the screen. And so it would wait maybe a second and a half. Which is an eternity, in a game, and then it would just reset the hardware. And what I did, and this is really interesting on Smash TV, some people will probably be mad hearing this. When we had battery backed up CMOS memory inside every coin-op, because there would be a high score table, of course, that's local to that coin-op device, and so all of that was stored in this, small chunk of memory on this battery-backed up CMOS memory chip. And so what I did is, when a game starts, somebody presses the start button, I would write to that CMOS that an active game has begun, and then when the game was over, I simply cleared that field. And so therefore, if the game ever crashed and had to be reset by this watchdog chip, the first thing I did upon boot up every time was to check that CMOS variable. And if it was set to 1, that communicated that, hey, somebody was in the middle of a game and the game crashed and, there was a lockup. And so if that was the case, then I automatically jumped into the middle of the game, not requiring any coin input, not going to the title page. I just went right to a level in the middle of your progression, and I put a message up on the screen that said, secret warp number 15 discovered. And so people would be playing, they'd be playing on, one of the levels, and they're, killing a bunch of grunts, and then all of a sudden the screen goes blank because it hit one of my bugs, and it takes a couple of seconds, and, it does a dong sound when the hardware initiates, and then it goes right back into the game, several seconds later with that message, secret warp found, because they're still hanging around the keyboard going, what the hell just happened?
Yep.
And so then they tried to figure out what it was that they did that triggered this secret warp, and they didn't know where they were anymore. And so that was my elegant way of recovering from a crash bug and trying to turn it into a positive.
That's awesome. So people thought they found something.
Right.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, was there opportunities, though, to fix bugs after shipment, or was that kind of it? Once it's out of your hands, it's done?
Well, the game would normally run on a couple of EEPROMs would be the code. And so there was no hard drive. There's no online connection. But when you are on location testing a game, we would simply update the game's EPROMs, on 2-3 times a week as you fix things, enhance things, fix bugs. And when you get it to a pretty good, situation where there aren't a lot of crash bugs and the game is performing well on your test location, then you go ahead and you burn a bunch of those EPROMs and you plug them into the cabinets that are, patiently waiting to get the final software, and they get boxed up and sent out. But occasionally, when there was a more egregious bug, we would send EPROMs to the various distributors around the country, and would even send out EPROMs directly to operators that had purchased the game. And we would tell them, how to pull the old chips off of the motherboard and place the new chips into the motherboard, and hope that they would execute that successfully.
Right.
And so occasionally we would fix the more egregious bugs in that fashion.
So I read somewhere that originally the game actually shipped without the Pleasure Dome bonus level implemented. Is that true?
Yeah, well, so that's that's of course the other thing that I get punched in the gut off and on when I meet people and they say, "Oh, Smash TV," and basically every level had a series of power-up icons that would randomly appear on the play space. And, some, would be spray weapons and, the elephant gun and, the little pea shooter. And occasionally one of those that I put in that table was the little key icon. And the key icon did nothing for you, unlike fast shoes or, smart bomb. When the players would beat the game, get through all the progression, beat all the boss monsters, I'm sure you've seen the, comments or the text if you've ever gotten that far in the game, but a text message scrolls up that says, you are an awesome Smash TV player, congratulations. And then I say, however, you are not the grand champion, and you cannot get into the Pleasure Domes because you have not collected enough keys. And so that is the message that would come up. And so people would go, hey, wait a minute, I know I collected a few keys, but, it doesn't tell me anywhere. There's no message that says you need 10 keys or 20 keys. And so there were no Pleasure Domes. It was just a scam on my part to put that message in the final text string. And we did get, this is kind of before the internet and before there would be any kind of online feedback for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we had enough players who asked the local arcade or, the operator, hey, how do I get this? And the operators were aware that sometimes there are new chips that go out. When you turn on a coin-op game, it says version, 1.01. And so they know that there might be a modification because they've got some customers complaining about something. So they basically started calling Williams Electronics midway and saying, hey, our game must not have the final software in it. And so it took me a while before, my boss, really the president of Williams Electronics, Neil Nicastro, before he said, okay, that's really not appropriate, and go ahead and let's make a new version and actually incorporate Pleasure Domes into the chips. And anybody who complains, then we'll send out those chips to them, and just eat the cost.
So the Pleasure Dome was not like you never intended to make it. It was just more story. Like it was just a sort of a story element for you. Is that kind of the way it was originally designed?
Yeah, it was. There's something I guess inside of me at that time when I was writing the text for saying congratulations, you've beaten the game. I realized that these players were, putting money into the game. And if I said, hey, thanks, go away, you never have to play this game again, go find something else to play, it didn't seem right. So I just kind of, without putting too much, a fear, or thought, I just said, hey, you didn't quite make it to the pleasure dome, so I just made it up. And, of course, that caused people to play the game again.
Of course.
And get all the way through. And when we would get people commenting or asking, I would often say, well, how many keys did you get? And, you didn't go the right way because this room over here has more keys. And, maybe you're too good at the game and you need to milk some of these rooms a little bit more, longer. Don't be so good at the level because, these keys randomly occur. And so people were, years later were upset because they'd say, I hung around in, room 13 for, 15 minutes. I collected 20 keys. I milked it, and I still didn't get into the pleasure domes.
That's great.
And, yeah, so when I tell them the story, usually I get some mean looks and an occasional punch in the gut.
No, that's awesome. It was your way of making them come back for more, and then it turned out to be not what you expected.
Yeah, it was a little underhanded, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Did you have any involvement in the ports to the home consoles?
Yeah, we hired a small company that was in Australia to do the NES and Super Nintendo version, and the programmer, the main programmer, I interacted with him. He came out to CES when the game launched on consumer, and I actually hired him and brought him into the States and into Chicago. And we've been working together actually for the last, 20 years, 25 years. So I work with him still today. His name is Jamie Rivette. We ended up doing, more games together, NBA Jam in particular. And so I work with him today at Zynga. So I worked very closely on the Super Nintendo and NES versions at the time.
Excellent. So what was the reception like on Smash TV? Was there ever any talk of doing more with that game?
Yeah. So the game was awarded that year at the coin-op shows as the innovative game of the year. It had some great revenue, some great earnings. And was a top 10, earning game for the year. It created, quite a kind of a cult following. Not everybody can actually handle the dual joystick mechanic, and so it wasn't for everybody. But a lot of developers over the years making console games now that use that kind of dual joystick mechanic on their console controllers have paid homage to that original Smash TV game. And of course, it's really Robotron that created that, but Smash TV, raised it up to, even more destruction and more carnage and, different weapons and, the boss monsters and so forth. So, it still has a great following. We actually did have a design on the table. I was going to kick off in the late, I guess it must have been around 2004 for a Smash TV. HD TV, Smash HD TV, we were calling it.
Oh, nice, yeah.
And so we were excited about doing that, but I continued to kind of get caught up in all of the sports products, which I'm a big sports fan, so I really love that category as well. And so I continued to do the sports games, and then Midway eventually melted down, and Warner Brothers bought up the rights to all of those games and properties. So people often ask me, hey, who's got the rights? How do we get a Smash TV sequel happening? And they own the rights now.
Yeah. So, and they own the rights now. So, like, even if there was a sequel today, like, would you have any involvement in it at all, or is it it's off your plate now?
Unless they ask me to offer any input. I'm still friends with Ed Boon, who's the Mortal Kombat co-creator with John Tobias, and he's at Warner Brothers, and so he might ask if they were going to do that. He'd say, hey, give me your 2 cents, or let's do some old school thing. But other than that, it'd be up to them.
Well, twin stick shooters, they've kind of had a resurgence in the last few years. So it's definitely a
category that not everybody can manipulate.
Exactly.
But the people that do, it's an amazing mechanic. Just the amount of power and control.
Oh, for sure. I love the dual stick mechanic.
Yeah, when one of the things that I love about video games, coin-op games in particular, I love the games that allow you to get out of these really tight spots. Like, you think, okay, there's no way I'm going to survive this. I'm totally outmanned. I'm outnumbered. But somehow the game mechanics allow you to feel, superhuman and escape. And the Robotron game, had that in spades. They just, all these grunts are coming at you, and you're weaving in and out and shooting behind you, and Smash TV to a similar degree, having all the weapons. And I remember watching somebody play Robotron. I eventually got to the same spot where I could go through the entire game, level 255.
Wow.
On Robotron, and wrap the machine back to, the easiest level. And I remember, though, watching really skilled players and just being, proud to be a human being, that the human brain just did what I saw this guy do. Running this way, cutting through, pixel by pixel, bullets firing in all these directions, lined up. It's really magical. And Asteroids has that. Lunar Lander, all these little types of mechanics, some really shine through, and so I've tried to maintain that throughout my career.
Hey, Mark, I want to throw you back to the Sega Genesis version. You mentioned the Super Nintendo one just for a second. I happen to have it in my hands right now. So were you involved in that one too, or was it the same team? And you just didn't mention it, or did somebody else do the Sega Genesis version?
No, same team. But primarily what we did is we would get builds of the game and review and do notes. So it wasn't local. So largely, I was kind of at the mercy of the team put together and just providing feedback. But same process went through.
It's kind of funny because in the manual, and if you'll recall, particularly with old games, a lot of times there would be things like when games didn't have the ability to save scores, there would often be a place where you could write your own score in the manual. And in this particular case, there's just a section at the back of the manual that says notes. And the original owner of this, who I believe is the person that gave me this game, his notes say, "This is a hard game." And you can tell that it's written by someone who looks like they're probably 8 years old or something, because it's printed, right? This is a hard game. But
that's funny, yeah.
Loved it.
Well, it's definitely very hard. The Super Nintendo version was the best of the consumer versions. It was pretty impressive.
Well, that was now the Super Nintendo, was that not called Super Smash TV?
Yeah, exactly.
And the Sega Genesis version is called that as well, even though it's it's on the Genesis, not on the Super.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I guess that was to differentiate it from the arcade version, essentially, I would assume.
Right.
And because everything was called Super back then when it was on the Super Nintendo.
Everything was super, exactly.
Exactly, yeah.
Super everything. Well, Mark, thank you so much for being on Lost Treasures of Gaming. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Where can people find out more about you, or can they follow you on Twitter? And tell us a bit about what you're doing today at Zynga.
Sure, yeah. I'm senior creative director, so I'm making new games for mobile phones and tablets and Facebook versions. My latest game is called Farmville Harvest Swap. It's a match 3 game that was editor's choice from Apple earlier this year. We have a studio down in San Diego, California, and I work with a bunch of smart and senior game developers, making various arcade style games for Zynga. And prior to Zynga, I've been there for over 4 years now. And prior to that, I was the senior creative director at EA Sports. So I was part of the revival of NFL Blitz and NBA Jam, helped out on Madden for a couple of iterations. And, so I'm a survivor in the video game business. Like I say, kind of the grandfather. Not many people probably can span the 1980 till today.
Till today, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I have an admission to make to you as well, Mark, that when I was probably around 12 years old, I had a copy of Sneakers. I don't know how I got it, so I had a pirated copy of your game, and I never ever thought I would be talking to you in person or this would come up. So I'm just going to let you know you missed out on that royalty from me back then. So I'm going to make a donation to my local SPCA in your name to make up for that copy of Sneakers. But it was one of those things where I don't even know where I got it from. But it's funny. I don't know if it was your name or if it was what it was, but I have always remembered your name in games, and I guess partly because you've been involved in so many games over so many years, but I always remembered seeing your name, and of course some of the other early games that you worked on as well. But I just wanted to let you know, I didn't know that at that time what I was doing was wrong.
I didn't either at the time. I had no clue,
honestly,
right?
I didn't realize what impact that piracy has. Although I must say, in some ways, piracy did.
I think we've lost Sid again.
Remember, a lot of people would say, well, get a Commodore 64 because I have games I can give you and whatnot. And so, as unfortunate as that is, it is the truth, unfortunately. But obviously today things are different, and we have much better systems set up, and piracy is less of a concern. It's always still a concern, but anyways, I'm going to do that because I have played your first game and have it, and of course. It's unfortunate we don't have it at the Personal Computer Museum because we have so many of the original games that I used to play. So I'm going to keep searching for a copy, and hopefully we'll find one. I know it's going to be really tough to find a packaged copy of it these days, but I'm going to keep looking.
Yeah, no, that was also that was a successful game. I was just somebody just sent me a link to an archive for like video game magazine or video games and computer entertainment. That had a story on Smash TV and some of those early Turmoil and Fast Eddie. So it's kind of fun to go back 30 years looking at that stuff. Yeah. But that was a good game, and I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, we do actually have people play it at the museum as well because it is on some of the discs that we use. So people actually like today. That come into the museum are still experiencing that game on Apple II hardware, so not through emulation, but real hardware. So, just so you know, your game is still being played by people today that come through our doors.
Oh, that's great, man. Yeah, thanks for keeping it all alive.
So, how can people follow you, Mark? Are you on Twitter?
No, I don't. I don't really participate much in like the different award shows or going to the different conferences. I just keep plugging away. I have a lot of people ping me on Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find. If somebody wants to look up Mark Turmell, I'm pretty easy.
All right.
Or they can just follow all your work over at Zynga.
Yep, exactly.
Excellent. Well, Mark, thank you again for being on Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Thank you, Mark.
Great. No, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I say it a lot, Sid, but that was another great interview.
It was. I mean, and for someone who's, again, worked in the industry so long, it's incredible. And not only has Mark worked in the industry for so long, he's worked on a lot of high-profile stuff and for a lot of high-profile companies, like not just smaller companies. I mean, he started out, even at the time when he was working for Serious Software, that was actually a fairly big player back then. And, of course, working for big companies like Zynga and Electronic Arts and, of course, Midway.
And Activision. He mentioned
and Activision
as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and a lot of our interviewees on this show, they're no longer in the gaming industry. Like it's rare for us to find someone who's still in the gaming industry 30 years later, and Mark is one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, it is one of those things where a lot of these men and women, kind of get burned out on, especially, some of the early games, and they maybe don't make the transition to some of the more modern stuff for one reason or another. So it's great to see somebody who has, he's obviously seen so much in the industry from, programming by himself on an Apple II to being part of a team now, much larger team, and how video games are made is, of course, completely different from when he started in 1980 making his first game. So
exactly.
He's been there for a long time, for sure.
I mean, I gotta tell you, I love the story he told about how he dealt with bugs in the game, and I gotta wonder how many people out there who played that game in the arcade thought that they had stumbled across something special because they found this warp.
Yeah.
Duped
by a bug. Yeah.
Duped by a bug. I mean, it's just, wow, that's a great story. I mean, and then of course getting the behind the scenes of what actually happened with this pleasure dome, that it was never intended to be made. It was just a ploy to get people to play more of the game. Like, that's the kind of information I like getting on this show. That's what makes this show so much fun, is getting that information you'd never have known before.
Right, and directly from the person involved as well. So
awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you
no
again.
Confusion.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you again, Mark. If you're listening to this, we really appreciate you taking your time out to speak to us. What a great interview. So that is it for this week's Lost Treasures of Gaming. Don't forget to visit gaminghistory101.com every Friday for a video of the very same game that we talk about on this show. It's a wonderful little partnership we have over there. You can follow us on Twitter at LostTreasuresOG. I can be found pretty much everywhere on Twitter and on all the gaming platforms as Zientane.
And, of course, you can find me on Twitter at Sid Bolton, and that's Sid with a Y. And if you do want to send us some feedback by, that thing called email, some people still use it, maybe send us an idea for a show upcoming or give us some kind of feedback, you can do so at losttreasuresofgaming@gmail.com. And if you want to, read the show notes and any links to some of the stuff that we talked about, of course, head over to omgnexus.com. You'll also find some other great content there that maybe you didn't know about.
And of course, be sure to listen to the next episode of our mother show, the OMG Hour, for a preview of what next week's buried classic may be. We'll be back again next week.
See you soon.
This has been an OMGNexus.com production.